Marisa. You're still on mute. Yay. Welcome, welcome. We're so happy for you to be here.
I'm happy to be here as well. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this community conversation. It's great to see both you and Monique.
Nice to see you, Marisa. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, thank you. And welcome to those who are gathering to hear our monthly community conversations. This is a series of conversations that we have each month about issues that are important to our Roxbury neighborhood. For those new to the urban ministry, we are located in John Elliott Square in Roxbury, and part of our campus includes the building that is known as First Church in Roxbury. The urban ministry provides services and programs to survivors of domestic violence. We have an after-school program for high school students, and we also bring the arts and humanities and lectures and community events into our campus. This conversation tonight is the kind of event that we would usually highlight in our historic meeting house, Boston's oldest surviving wood frame church. But since we can't be together in person, we are gathering this way to keep the conversation going.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Monique Marshall-Veal. I'm the Director of Special Projects at the Urban Ministry. As Mary Margaret said, in light of the fact that we can't gather, we have started these community conversations. And our community conversations focus on history, art, and the experiences of Black and Indigenous people of color. These conversations provide an opportunity to raise awareness about the experiences of Roxbury residents and residents of other Boston neighborhoods. We thank you for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you in February at our community conversation on educational equity with Joseph Feaster Jr. Thank you again for joining us this evening.
So tonight, just to tell you about the order of events, first we're going to share a message from tonight's community conversation sponsors, which is a joint sponsorship by two of our beloved member congregations, First Parish in Lexington and Fallen Church in Lexington, two of our Unitarian Universalist member congregations. Then we're going to share a commercial featuring a Black-owned business that we have been producing these ourselves. And we're very proud to highlight some of the businesses that are in Roxbury. And our hope is to encourage everyone watching to support the businesses that we're featuring. And finally, then we'll begin our main event, a conversation about the very serious issue of gentrification and displacement that is happening in Roxbury today. We are so proud to have pulled together a stellar panel of people who are working on this issue. And our keynote speaker tonight is Marisa Luse, who we will introduce in a moment. But first, some commitment minutes from our sponsoring congregations.
First Parish in Lexington is happy to co-sponsor, along with our sister congregation, Fallen Church, tonight's Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry community conversation called What's Happening to Roxbury? A Conversation on Gentrification and Displacement. It features Roxbury native and lifelong resident Marisa Luse. This is a pressing issue in Roxbury, which, like some other communities in the Boston area, is seeing a significant rise in gentrification and the subsequent displacement of longtime Roxbury residents who simply can't afford the rent of these gentrified apartments. We are grateful for the opportunity to understand more about how gentrification adversely affects Roxbury communities in terms of raising the cost of housing, breaking up close-knit neighborhoods, and forcing people out of their communities. First Parish in Lexington strongly supports the Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry mission of building a bridge between suburban UU churches and the Roxbury community, and we have been involved for over 30 years. I think you will find tonight's conversation provocative, and I am delighted that you are attending. Welcome.
Hello. I'm Reverend Claire Feingold-Thorne, the minister of Fallen Church. A few members of Fallen shared why their work with the UU Urban Ministry is important to them. One member said they love supporting the urban ministry because they can live their UU values and break out of the isolation in the suburbs. Another member is inspired by working with women in the Believe in Success program. Another shared they are proud to be part of an organization with deep connections to the Roxbury community. And finally, another member shared the range of relationships made through the urban ministry changed their worldview and their understanding of racism's oppressive power. We are honored to be changed by the work we do together and to be co-sponsoring this community conversation with First Parish in Lexington.
Thank you. We have so many congregations that support the mission of the urban ministry and our journey towards racial and educational justice. Many thanks to our sponsors tonight, again, First Parish Lexington and Fallen Church in Lexington. Thank you for your commitment and your continued work to diversity, equity, and justice.
And now we're very proud to share a commercial that we've created to highlight one of the businesses of one of our neighbors.
Welcome to Frugal Bookstore in famous Nubian Square. My name is Leonard Egerton. I'm one of the owners along with my wife Clarissa, and we are standing in our children's corner. Well, Frugal Bookstore actually opened in 2001. Bob Romano, who had Frugal Furniture Stores, and he had a niche in every furniture store. I came in there and I just saw all these books, and I was like, one of these days, this is going to be my store. We was actually in the Washington Park Mall at the time. And I worked with him, and then my wife Clarissa, she joined us, and we started a new livelihood, Frugal Bookstore. He sold us the store in 2005. We were there until 2016, when we moved to what was Dudley Square then, which is now Nubian Square. And we've been here for 4 years.
Hi, everyone. My name is Clarissa Cropper Egerton, and I am one of the co-owners of Frugal Bookstore. Welcome. One of the things that we definitely want to incorporate this year in 2021 is having virtual events with authors. A lot of authors have emailed us with interest in wanting to have an event with us, so we are looking forward to bringing that to you. Sure. So right now we have our children's corner, hardcover children's books, there's story picture books here. So these are the beginner reader books here. So for children in kindergarten and preschool, our toddler section. So we have a bunch of board books for toddlers, anywhere from 6 months to young adult. Nonfiction section here. And then we have our fiction books over here. And then we get into the YA fantasy.
This is a really, really good series. This is a Black scientist. His name is Max Axiom.
Yes.
So Max Axiom talks about a number of different things. Like this one is about cell phone technology. He's riding down the throat, the digestive system. Max Axiom.
So our section here is our children Latinx section. Over here, we have our nonfiction section. We have autobiography sections against the wall here. We have history section. In the front, we have current events. We have sports biography, music biography, and our African-American studies section.
And we have our crime and mystery section right here with one of our well-known authors, Walter Mosley. We even have some John Grisham. Octavia Butler is featured here because she's just one of the most sought-after sci-fi writers.
We also carry Bibles.
And Qurans.
And Qurans as well. And we have them in English, and we have children's Bibles.
To order online, all you have to do is just go to frugalbookstore.net. It's very simple. You can also buy gift cards, and it's an easy process just checking out. Our hours of operation are Monday through Wednesday, 10 to 3 p.m., Thursday and Friday, 10 to 5 p.m., and Saturday, 10 to 3 p.m. The mission of the Frugal Bookstore is to change minds one book at a time and to increase the literacy in our community. You missed it. No. You missed it. I'm a star.
He is a star. So please remember, those who are watching, please support Frugal Bookstore. Buy gift cards, order online. Support all the businesses in Nubian Square. So, as the executive director of the Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry, soon after I began working in Roxbury, I became aware of the conversation about the very real impact that gentrification was having on the community that I had begun working in. And when we were planning this series of conversation, we decided that this critical issue was one that we must highlight in our conversations. And we were Marisa was the first person that we reached out to see if she would be willing to speak with us about this. Marisa Luse is a lifelong Roxbury resident. She considers her neighborhood the village that raised and nurtured her. She has extensive nonprofit management, community engagement, and civic leadership experience, and in all her work uplifts humanity and engagement. She is active in raising awareness of the pressures, displacement, and damage that is being caused by development and gentrification in her Roxbury village. Among her volunteer work is service on the Roxbury Strategic Master Plan Committee and the Roxbury Historical Committee. I am very proud to welcome her this evening. Welcome, Marisa.
Thank you so very much, Reverend Earl. It's an honor and privilege to be be in this space with you, and but also to be a part of this wonderful series that your church is sponsoring.
Thank you.
Hi, Marisa. Welcome again. It is our honor to be in your presence. So thank you for sharing your time with us. Can you start by telling us a little bit about who you are and what it was like to grow up in your village of Roxbury?
So my story begins with my maternal grandparents, my grandmother who migrated to Boston from Savannah, Georgia in the 50s, and my grandfather, a World War II veteran. After he completed his tour, he was discharged from Fort Devens and decided to leave his life in the Midwest and start a new life in Boston. And they met on the streets of Roxbury during the jazz era, and the rest was history. I was born in Roxbury, and I've lived in Roxbury all my life. I grew up in Lower Roxbury between Mass Ave and Milmea Cass, then later moved to the Garrison Trotter neighborhood of Roxbury as a teenager, and that's where I still call home. I attended Boston Public Schools, being bused from Roxbury to Charlestown for elementary and middle school years. Later, I attended Boston Technical High School and Northeastern University, which both were within walking distance of my neighborhood home. So I love to live, work, and play in the same area. And my civic life really began when I was around 12 years old. And when I was younger, I really felt like I grew up in a village, right? And I could really do many of the things that a lot of young children could do. So I'd ride my bike around everywhere and go to the park and do all kinds of things. But one day I had passed the Women's Service Club on Mass Ave, and there were all these beautifully dressed women coming in and out of that building. And I just stopped in awe and observed them. And then one day this lovely woman stopped and just, engaged me in conversation. And that conversation led to, me going in and seeing them rehearse for their annual fundraiser, which was this Follies that they would put on in the Back Bay, to then becoming the president of the Junior Service Club, and also participating in the Follies the next year. So that was really cool. But what that moment taught me was the power of women, community, and organizing. And so from there, when I was at Northeastern, I got to explore service learning through a co-op. And one of my co-ops was at City Mission Society. And that's when I shifted my focus from being like a legal focused career path to a mission-driven one. And so that's what I've been committed to ever since. And I really feel like my community really helped shape who I am in the path that I'm on.
Why, Marisa, can you say why you have gotten involved in issues around gentrification and displacement, and tell me a bit about what you're seeing?
So, you know, why I got involved is really one from my love for Roxbury. Right, and that I have seen a shift in the community that I grew up in my formative years to now. And I really wanted to really understand that. You know, I did see the disinvestment as I was growing up, but I saw it, but I didn't understand it, right? But it was also where I lived. And so it just, you know, was a part of my, just my existence. And so even as I was talking to my mother about gentrification and displacement, you know, she grew up in the 50s and the 60s. She grew up in, you know, in Roxbury as well, in a similar environment, especially during a time where the community was being torn down all around her. My mother grew up on William Street, and her house, the building that she lived in, was the only house that was left. And so she would they would be at the dinner table and hearing the bulldozers and or having lunch, and you know, living through this. And as a young person, as a person who had asthma. And so, you know, and so that really impacted me. I really wanted to understand how gentrification and how displacement played a role in my family's life. And then I also wanted to be a part of the solutions in terms of bringing my experiences as well as the experiences of other community members into the space as I began to learn and also, do work around making decisions around the parcels in the community.
Can you say just what you meant by the word disinvestment for folks who may not know what that means?
So, you know, disinvestment really centers around the fact that when longtime residents or folks who are originally from a neighborhood are forced to move due to higher rents, due to property taxes, and which is a result of gentrification. And so many residents, and particularly Black Bostonians, have been displaced in the city of Boston, and particularly neighborhoods like Roxbury.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Marisa, we know that this topic of gentrification is a very layered topic, and especially for the Roxbury residents. Can you share with us a little bit about the high-level history of the pressures of gentrification in Roxbury?
For me, I think, you know, it really begins in terms of gentrification around looking at the strategic disinvestment and displacement in Roxbury, and one is around boundaries. So, in my intro, I mentioned that, I was born in Roxbury, and so the boundaries of Roxbury have been shifting for years, like for centuries. And these shifts are very telling in understanding gentrification and displacement in Roxbury. And so I'm on the board of Roxbury Historical Society, and being one of the youngest and newest members of that board, Barry Wilson would talk to us a lot about boundaries and the importance of boundaries. And so I now look at the boundaries of Roxbury from 1868, when Roxbury was annexed from Boston. And it's very important because that it includes parts of the city that, like the Longwood District area, Jamaica Plain, that were a part of Roxbury. When my parents, when they bought their home, we were told that we lived in Dorchester, and because we lived in Lower Roxbury, we didn't know the difference, but when talking with other residents, they're like, no, this is Roxbury. And so I think it's very important to understand these boundaries and looking at the historical relevance of the boundaries and why that changes in our community. I mean, why those changes occur, who do they benefit, and why. And also in terms of urban renewal, right? And the impacts that urban renewal had. It had impacts on my family. My family had a really great life on William Street. My mother lost friends because of the fact that she had to move. Many people decided to go back to the South. So it really had a real impact on people's lives economically, socially, and so understanding that the role that urban renewal had, and I know many of the other panelists who have been doing significant work will be able to speak in more detail around that as well. And I mean, there's many more, there's several other things, but I don't know if those highlights are helpful.
That is helpful.
They are very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for providing a little bit of the backdrop. And we know we could have a 20 series session about this, just to unpack it, but it's helped us frame it a bit. And I think now we can, Marisa had helped us to reach out to gather an impressive panel of Roxbury residents who are involved in various ways in the struggle, against gentrification and displacement and its impact on the community. So I would like to welcome our panelists, who are going to be joining us by video now. And file in. Hello. Hello.
Welcome.
Hi, welcome Tomiqua, welcome Rita, welcome Arnesse, welcome Rodney. Okay, and I think we're just waiting for Nina will be joining us, I'm sure, in just a moment. Hi Nina. So our guests today include Mr. Rodney Singleton. Mr. Singleton, who is an engineer, is very active in his community, and he currently serves as president of the Highland Park Community Land Trust, co-chair of the Highland Park Project Review Committee. He's a member of Plan Dudley IAG, a member of the Bartlett Yard Project Review Committee, and lastly is a member of the Highland Park Neighborhood Coalition. Welcome, Rodney. And Rodney was one of the first people that I actually met when I started working at the urban ministry. So it's an extra treat for me to welcome him here today. I also want to introduce Rita Poussaint Nethersole, who I actually just met today. She has a long history of service in higher education, most recently as Associate Dean of Graduate Studies for Academic and Student Affairs at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. And as a volunteer, She served as community chair of the Grove Hall Safe Neighborhood Initiative and on the board of directors for Project Right, Restore and Improve Grove Hall Together. Welcome, Rita.
Thank you. Welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you. I will introduce Arnesse Brown. Arnesse Brown has over 25 years of experience in community and corporate relations and management. She is currently the corporate relations manager for Tenants Development Corporation. Arnesse serves on boards of Youth Enrichment Services, which is known as YES, where she serves as an officer. She also has started the I Am Harriet Coalition in response to the sale and demolition of the Harriet Tubman House in the South End of Boston. I also welcome Ms. Arnesse, and I have the pleasure of introducing a longtime friend, Nina LaNegra. Nina is an independent artist, journalist, and media educator, activist, is a 20+ year resident of Roxbury, Lower Roxbury, and the South End. Nina's volunteerism with restoring old nonprofit, United Neighbors of Lower Roxbury, Inc. as a board of director. She's the vice president of the Roxbury Cultural District in Nubian Square. And she is the founder and host of the performance series entitled Art is Life Itself for 13 years that was hosted at the Haley House Bakery Cafe. All of those experiences and leadership roles prepared her for a deep understanding of the neighborhoods of Boston and the history of gentrification therein. Welcome, Nina. And I have the honor of introducing Tomiqua Williams. Tomiqua is a Roxbury native. She's the first generation college graduate and a mother of 3. She has professional experience as a housing and community advocate for underserved communities. She is a former board member of the United Neighbors of Lower Roxbury, former president of Resident Association, and active member of Friends of Melnia Cass Boulevard. Tomiqua is passionate about educating residents in affordable housing units about their rights and how to advocate for themselves to address social injustices. Again, welcome to all of our panelists for tonight. Thank you for being here and sharing your expertise and experiences with us.
Yes, so as folks can hear with the depth of experience and knowledge that our panelists bring, we are going to have the challenge of just scratching the surface, but we hope that we'll be able to highlight some of the key issues around the issue of gentrification and displacement in Roxbury tonight. So I wanted to start with my first question is for Rodney. I'm wondering, Rodney, if you could tell us a little about your family's generational experience of gentrification and displacement in Roxbury.
Sure. So I've been living in Roxbury now for my entire life. I was born in 1961 on Monroe Street, and it seems to me that I was sort of born to it almost, because not long after I was born, the BRA was formed, or shortly before I was born, and I think Marisa went over it a little bit, and she touched on how the agency sort of operated back in those days. And so our family home back then was taken, and it was demolished, and we were homeless, and so we actually had to find a new home. But this is sort of a precursor to this idea of disinvestment, because the thought is to allow folks to make their way housing wise, income wise, but exactly the opposite happened. So when that started to happen, that's when the disinvestment actually started. And so redlining and the like essentially made sure that banks weren't loaning money to our neighborhood, and so you couldn't fix up your place. the city was taking it down to basically kind of crush dynastic wealth in the Black and brown neighborhood, which is yet another thing, because if you study the genesis of gentrification, the gentry, it's about the gentry class. And so, we can't talk about gentrification and not talk about the wealth gap, where, if you try to buy a house in Roxbury now, the median price is going to be just north of $500,000, where the median income of a family of four in Roxbury is not much more than $30,000 a year. And so this huge chasm in wealth is something that sort of is part of why we're actually talking about this. So that's how I got indoctrinated, if you will, or learned about it. For years and years and years, we had to move about because there was lots and lots of city taking this, city taking that, kind of removing opportunities or taking opportunities off the table for people to own and build wealth, and the idea that we can say that when folks have jobs and can earn a living, maybe we can close that wealth gap. But I'm a product of busing, and so you can't have this conversation also without talking about the gap in education, where I think the schools are now more segregated than when I went to school back in the 70s. And so and there were court orders to actually make sure segregation was dealt with. So that's just a little flavor of sort of my view of things.
Yeah. Thank you, Rodney. There's a lot there. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, in moving on, I'd like to ask our panelists to share a little bit about the work that she has done in Lower Roxbury and in the South End. And I'd like to pose that question to Ms. Nina. I know you have a wealth of information that you'd like to share with us, but if you could talk a little bit about the work that you've done in Lower Roxbury and the South End, and share a little bit with our audience tonight.
You're on.
Thank you. I'm probably going to do less of that and more of something a little bit different, some historical information, which I'd love to build on what Rodney and Marisa were saying, which is very powerful, those personal stories of suffering at the hands of the state through eminent domain and takings of real estate. My work began in 1979 with Lower Roxbury when I was introduced to the neighborhood by Mrs. Corinne Woodson-Alene, who was a wonderful woman, passed away at the age of 93 and had 3 careers. She was on her 3rd one when I met her. She was 79 years old. And she taught me a lot about the history of Lower Roxbury and the incredible history of Lower Roxbury and Roxbury in general. So what I'm hoping to do today is to give you a very brief synopsis of 100 years of history as it pertains to Roxbury and Lower Roxbury in the South End. So I'm not going to get into the West End and Beacon Hill and the moving out of Africans from that area, but I am going to talk just a little bit about gentrification and urban renewal. Urban renewal has also been called Negro removal, specifically designed to repair blight and to improve properties. That word blight is very important. Mel King tells a story of how he went off to college in the 1950s and his parents sent him a newspaper clipping, and that was when he first learned that his neighborhood, the New York Streets area, was blighted. And so this is a very important and telling word because it came about from the real estate industry and the banking industry and the insurance industry and others, business people organizing to figure out how they were going to take property. So there were 3 waves of gentrification in Boston so far. The first one was back then in the 1950s to the 70s, where the economic fabric was destroyed by removing the businesses from blighted areas, and Black, brown, poor, and immigrant people were displaced, never to return or out of business forever permanently. The second wave was in the 1970s to 1983, where families were destroyed and community stability was destroyed. I think this is what Marisa and Rodney were both referring to. And the dates aren't hard and fast. It kind of flips over to both sides of those dates. And you had displaced homeowners and still using blight as access to displace. And over 2,200 homes and buildings were destroyed. And that was part of making way for this dreadful highway that the feds, and as part of the national highway movement, and the state and the city were trying to do. At the same time that they were taking people's property for the highway, they were also displacing people out of Roxbury. Now that's a whole long thing. There's a book about it, People Before Highways. Carolyn Crockett wrote that. She's one of the chiefs in the city of Boston, wonderful woman. And the most recent repelling of the destruction of over 100 mature trees was a continuation of this People Before Highways movement. So that was 50 years ago, People Before Highways. For the past 11 years in my neighborhood, Lower Roxbury, we have been fighting the city of Boston not to take over 100 mature trees. And just recently, like last week, we got a letter stating that, yes, they are going to listen to us finally. Yes, they're going to stop the project. Yes, they're going to plan with the community to come up with something that we want as a community, which is a greenway, very much nicer than a scaled down highway. And so we're hoping that we're going to have a better, more inclusive process, and that we're going to have a beautiful design for the Greenway from Melnia Cass Boulevard, named after that tireless worker, Melnia Cass, who lived in Lower Roxbury as well. So the third wave is the destruction of institutions. And behind me on my screen, you see what was once the Harriet Tubman House. Now it's a gaping hole, and it's making way for 55 luxury condos. And this is frightening. We don't need more luxury condos. We have enough luxury condos in Boston, especially down by the water side. But let me say more about that. That parcel that you see, 566 Columbus Ave, is parcel 17, and it was deeded to the community and protected by what's called the Land Disposition Agreement, or LDA. Well, we soon found out how short shrift a protection such as a land distribution agreement has for the people, the residents of Roxbury and Boston. That was a function of the BRA, now called the BPDA, and they were tossed aside because of a well-crafted land grab to benefit the wealthy and white in the South End. So when I speak of gentrification and when I speak of urban renewal, I'm actually speaking of something that we see being played out on a federal level and a global level, because gentrification is global. That is that of white male supremacy. So I'm not mincing my words. I'm not skirting around the issue. I'm going right for it, because I think that together we can come up with a solution. I have some ideas about that, but I'll just put a pin in it right there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nina.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And you're right, there's a whole lot of history behind that. And at some point, we will continue the conversation, because you have a lot of information to share with us. So thank you.
Yes, that was the tip of the iceberg.
Just the tip. That's thank you again. So Arnesse, I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the work that you have done with the Tenant Development Corporation and the I Am Harriet Coalition. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your work in those areas, that would be great.
Good evening. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this, this is one of my favorite subjects, as I am a South Ender. I'm an old South Ender. Grew up in the largest multiracial family in the South End, where my dad was a mix of Black, German, and Jewish, and always said, where else but the South End could we have lived? And so to see the changes over the last couple of years spearheaded me, especially when the Harriet Tubman was up for sale, to start I Am Harriet. But I'll quickly give some background on Tenants Development Corporation. We are a historical Black-owned organization founded, ironically, at United South End Settlements in the 60s, 1968, by a Black woman. We are historical in that we were the first organization in the country to win a legal landmark case on the side of a tenant in a tenants versus landlord case using a Jewish process. Before us, there were no tenants' rights, there were no housing courts, there was no affordable housing. We laid the ground for the development of affordable housing and changing housing policies. And what, again, is so amazing is that we were founded at United South End Settlements at 48 Rutland by a Black woman, Mary Longley, who has since passed. Mary Longley also started 2 of the South End community gardens, as she was an avid gardener. With the I Am Harriet coalition, it started after a group of us who are former kids of the South End who are now adults, but we reactivated a coalition started by Mel King when we heard that the Harriet Tubman was up for sale. And there was no community process. Most of folks of color were left out of the conversation. When you had a former board member of USCS, Father Tim of St. Stephen's Church, Steve Godfrey of Langham Court, and a number of other people gathered together to start reactivate Mel's. At some point, the men dropped off and left the women. And I said, okay, someone's gonna have to be the voice for Harriet Tubman. And talking to some of the elders in the community, I said, I feel like I'm gonna start something called I Am Harriet, because somebody needs to be the voice for Harriet Tubman. And that's what started the coalition. Could not have imagined how much it would grow. Huffington Post came to Boston to do an article with us. LaNegra, so many different people were so instrumental. PSL, which is a group of socialists. Young people are pretty amazing. They are fearless. And so when PSL joined I Am Harriet, we were able to shut down City of Boston's community process through when they were doing the IAG process. We were able to shut that down. And so far, we have had a lot of impact, but what we found is that with all of our community input and community engagement and shutting down City of Boston's processes, that could not stop what I call hyper-gentrification. Because if you are going to tear down the Harriet Tubman house that sits on parcel 17, which was given to the Black community due to the atrocities of urban renewal, then we have a problem. And as one of my friends who is a white male, he said, Arnesse, we cannot allow the Harriet Tubman house, originally founded by 6 Black women, to go to 5 white men. And that sums it up for me, is that here we are in a city after our mayor announced that he wanted Boston to be the leader of racial equity and to end systemic racism, yet for some reason he either didn't understand that his support of these 5 white men to literally get a protected parcel that had an LDA, all types of deed restrictions, to 5 white men, kicking out our organization, which is a Black-owned historical organization. And here we are over Dunkin' Donuts. And so if that's not just a textbook example of hyper-gentrification, I don't know what else is.
Thank you, Arnesse. Thank you for that important overview. And I wonder, I wanted to ask Tomiqua, Tomiqua, how do you see the work that you're doing on affordable housing as fitting into this larger conversation? I wonder if you could speak about some of the work that you're doing.
Yes, the rental prices are definitely unaffordable, as everyone has touched upon. So in affordable housing, pushing more residents to speak up in terms of things not being repaired properly, in terms of their rights being violated, in terms of issues with disabilities, as others have spoken on, in terms of not being able to even reach for home ownership because the rental rates are just unaffordable, even in subsidized housing. You're never able to reach that maximum rent to come out of your placement. So you're stuck. There is no way of coming out, as Boston has changed over the last 5 to 10 years. So between 2010 and 2015, a lot of the multifamily complex were dealing with expiring use. So residents were to be informed and try to mobilize. The notion is put out there to residents, don't worry, because you will still pay your 30%. But looking back in history, all of these developments were built to have low rent, not the terminology of affordable housing that we use today, but that rents were to remain low so that families could reach that and be able to do more to sustain than just food and shelter. Most people today are just dealing with that and trying to get through the necessities. They can't even make it. So that's what I do see from a lot of my seniors that I hear from. They're barely making their medication, barely able to do things that they used to because of all the traffic and buildings being redone, or everywhere is things when you don't have transportation, you're coming in crossfire with a lot of different things. So I think without having a voice, just as Nina talked about with Melnia Cass project, we live right there. A lot of complexes right there had no idea that that project was even going to exist with removal. So and the work that I'm doing is basically bringing awareness, amplifying the voices of our community, trying to empower them that you have to let people know what issues you're dealing with so that we can get resolutions and not be fearful of retaliation, which is happening, even though we have those things on the books not to happen. People are retaliated for speaking up. So in the community that I live with in affordable housing, many of the complexes, as I said, had expiring use, and they're now being given to developers, such as one called Lenox Street Development, one of the oldest developments in Boston. William Trotter, if anybody knows about him, you should go look up his history. He fought hard about racial injustice too, and he is one of the names on this development. But it was sold, given 100% to a developer, right, with no percentages to stakeholders. And in the past, there's been the buildings designed to have residents be stakeholders and have real ownership, be a limited partner. And we see that it hasn't changed, where we see the $8 net worth of Blacks in our community. And what are we doing today to stop the wealth gap, as Rodney talked about? And we don't see any layup. And so we really just see the character of the community changing and just being ignored. As we see some of the things on the news where people are calling for people going to pool, going to spaces that used to be the long-term resident spaces and being told that you can't be in those spaces. Those are some issues that people are dealing with today.
Thank you, Tomiqua. Thank you. So I wanted to ask Rita a question. Rita, you have a perspective that, so much of what we've heard is focusing on Roxbury and Boston and the forces that have been playing out here. You have a perspective that actually precedes your experience in Boston. And I wonder if you could talk about your experiences in New York and how you're seeing some of those same dynamics played out in this city.
Yeah, unlike a lot of the people on this panel, I'm not from Boston. I'm a native New Yorker, Mets, not Yankees. I grew up in a Black community in Queens, St. Albans, which is like Roxbury, it's a historic Black community. And when I moved to Boston and decided to buy a home, I was looking for a community similar to what I grew up in. And for me, that was Roxbury. And I have watched as St. Albans became gentrified through the process that's happening. I also grew up in Harlem, and you all know what's happened in Harlem in terms of gentrification and displacement. It may be the most horrifying example of displacement of a historic Black community. And so I watched as that happened, and I moved to the South End when I came to Boston and slowly got pushed out of the South End. And so now I'm in Tommy's Rock, which is a Black community of Roxbury. Tommy's Rock is, if you don't know, is that big rock over by St. Joseph's and Washington Street. It's named for Tommy Homigan, who was a free Black Native man who farmed this area in the 18th century. So it's a historic Black community. And one of our big issues is development and the amount and the type of development that's imposed upon Roxbury. And I want to be clear that development often sounds like it's the solution to gentrification and displacement, but unfettered and overdevelopment does not solve gentrification and displacement. In fact, it often exacerbates it. So, and so that's one of the issues that we're dealing with as we see developers moving in on Roxbury. The Tommy's Rock Neighborhood Association came up with a manifesto basically that said, this is what we find acceptable for development in our community. And one of our biggest concerns is what the panelists have said several times here, which is much of the land that is going to developers now is land that was taken. It was taken through urban renewal, eminent domain, for the interstate that never happened. It was taken when they took down the Orange Line and disconnected Roxbury from rapid transit. A lot of that land is what was supposed to eventually be public land, and now it's being given to developers. And that's one of our big concerns, is the use of public land for private profit. And that's one of our focus as we deal with all of this. And we're also concerned very much about, again, the type and the amount of housing that's being developed, because if there's one thing that we have learned in this pandemic, it's that density is a big issue in terms of maintaining a healthy community. And, you know, I have yet to see BPDA even mention that as an issue, or the Zoning Board of Appeals mention that as an issue as they approve developments and processes.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you. I think the next couple of questions are just, we want to open it up for a bit of conversation amongst all of us. So maybe you can share, anybody who wants to take these questions, can you share what you're witnessing now about the forces of gentrification in the neighborhood now? And maybe say, how has it impacted you and your loved ones personally?
Interesting.
Go ahead, Rodney.
I was going to say, Rita, another bad neighborhood in New York is Bedford-Stuyvesant.
Oh, yes. Yes. My father worked there, yes. And you know what's happening there. Yeah. You know, so, but I was thinking when you said, how has this affected me personally? I got my tax bill the other day. And my property taxes went up 30% in 1 year. I don't know why the city thought in a pandemic was a great time to raise people's property taxes, and I am fortunate that I can manage such an increase. But that's the kind of thing that forces seniors out of neighborhoods.
Yep.
That forces mom and pop landlords who provide the most affordable housing. That's the kind of thing that just pushes And the reason it happened is because a house down the street from me sold for almost $1 million.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, it's dominoes, you know, that happens, and then this happens, and then it pushes me out, and then maybe somebody buys my house for a lot of money, and that raises my neighbor's property taxes. So that's how it's hit me in the last week or so.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think, Rita, you raised an excellent few points there, and it's amazing how much we packed in here, Reverend Mary Margaret.
I know, I am amazed. Awesome. You guys are awesome.
But I think one of the things that's resounding in my head is about development. Development in and of itself is not a bad thing,
Right.
but rampant development, unbridled
Unchecked.
greed, unchecked.
Yes.
Unchecked.
Non-responsive to the community.
Oh, absolutely. So destructive. And I would love to have a copy of your manifesto. And maybe that's something we can share with other neighborhoods here in Roxbury and beyond, because the fall of Parcel 17, or the Harriet Tubman House, for me, was an incredible indicator that gentrification was going to spread rampantly from the South End all the way to Hyde Park. And that, I mean, it's global. It's a global phenomenon. It's a national phenomenon. But in Boston, it's going to spread, maybe all the way out to Amherst or Greenfield or some such place. But this is something that needs to be publicly stated, but now we have to deal with solutions. What are the solutions? And I heard some of them here, and I'll end with this, and that is ownership. You know, ownership of property, of homes and businesses, not jobs, but businesses. And people need to register to vote. And then actually go and vote, you know, for people that are representing their interests. And if they're not, then vote them out, like we just did in November. So, and we should continue to do going forward. And so the other thing is, Marisa, you're on the Roxbury Master Plan Strategic Oversight Committee, and that was put there to help with this kind of thing. There needs to be more engagement with people who are occupying these positions to help change the circumstances.
Thank you for that. And Nina, you highlighted a couple of points. One is the ownership. I think the ownership is so key and vital, and we need to really, really look at different ways that ownership can happen, because, even my generation are finding it hard to stay in the city and deciding to leave because we can't afford to buy here in Roxbury. It's way too expensive. And Tomiqua also, highlighted this as well. If you do want to become a homeowner and you are living in affordable housing or public housing, how do you do that? And still afford to live there, especially when rents are going up. But I mean, I don't even know, was it 400% that happened at Grand Manor? It was absolutely crazy how much that rent went up. So that's one part. The other part, and I agree, is community engagement. And so being one of the newest members on the committee, the Roxbury Strategic Master Plan Oversight Committee, community engagement was one of the things that I really wanted to understand and also work around. But the other part is not only the members, but it's also other community members coming out and participating in this, one, making sure that there's space for them to understand and be able to be fully engaged, but also that level of participation, because we're mightier when we're stronger when we are have more people at the table. And so, and we need to become, that means the committee as well as the city and organizations that are doing work around this issue, really being creative with solutions in terms of how do we engage community members better as well. Because that's the only way that we're going to be able to do it, get this done, is through collective action.
I was going to say, I think the numbers are instructive. Oh, go ahead.
No, finish your thought, Rodney, and then I think we're going to go to Q&A because I can already see
Okay.
the questions.
I think the numbers.
Thought,
I think
Rodney,
the numbers.
Open it up.
I think the numbers are instructive for possible solutions. So the wealth gap in Boston is $274,000 for a white family versus $8 for a black family. So we can do one of two things. We can have the wealth gap closed to the point where we have more and more people that actually can buy. And then the other piece is that to build 1 unit of housing in the city of Boston cost $400,000. And so we've got to press really hard in the city to add the kind of subsidy that reduces that cost from $400,000 to maybe half that. And, every time you push there, the city always balks because, they've got a finite amount of money to give out during funding rounds for housing. And so those two things I see as being very instructive to kind of push on.
Thank you, Rodney.
So I think what I'm going to do is, to that point, Rodney, about the wealth gap, we want to show our commercial about frugal books again, because some people didn't hear it at the beginning. It'll just be a couple of minutes, and then we're going to come back and spend the rest of our time in Q&A. So I want to highlight, and we want, again, everybody to support Frugal Books, purchase from Frugal Books, buy gift cards, do all your shopping for any books from Frugal Books. And support, and that's what we feel about all the businesses in Nubian Square that are Black-owned businesses. So we're cut to a commercial. We'll come right back, and we're gonna pose your questions to the panelists.
Welcome to Frugal Bookstore in famous Nubian Square. My name is Leonard Egerton. I'm one of the owners, along with my wife Clarissa, and we are standing in our children's corner. Well, Frugal Bookstore actually opened in 2001. Bob Romano, who had Frugal Furniture Stores, and he had a niche in every furniture store. I came in there and I just saw all these books, and I was like, one of these days, this is going to be my store. We was actually in the Washington Park Mall at the time. And I worked with him, and then my wife Clarissa, she joined us, and we started a new livelihood, Frugal Bookstore. He sold us the store in 2005. We were there until 2016, when we moved to what was Dudley Square then, which is now Nubian Square. And we've been here for 4 years.
Hi, everyone. My name is Clarissa Cropper Egerton, and I am one of the co-owners of Frugal Bookstore. Welcome. One of the things that we definitely want to incorporate this year in 2021 is having virtual events with authors. A lot of authors have emailed us with interest in wanting to have an event with us, so we are looking forward to bringing that to you. Sure. So right now we have our children's corner, hardcover children's books, there's story picture books here. So these are the beginner reader books here. So for children in kindergarten, preschool, our toddler section. So we have a bunch of board books for toddlers, anywhere from 6 months to young adult. Nonfiction section here. And then we have our fiction books over here. And then we get into the YA fantasy.
This is a really, really good series. This is a Black scientist. His name is Max Axiom.
Yes.
So Max Axiom talks about a number of different things. Like this one is about cell phone technology. He's riding down the throat, the digestive system. Max Axiom.
So our section here is our Children Latinx section. Over here, we have our nonfiction section. We have autobiography sections against the wall here. We have history section. In the front, we have like current events. We have sports biography, music biography, and our African American studies section.
And we have our crime and mystery section right here with one of our well-known authors, Walter Mosley. We even have some John Grisham. Octavia Butler is featured here because she's just one of the most sought-after sci-fi writers.
We also carry Bibles.
And Qurans.
And Qurans as well. And we have them in English, and we have children's Bibles.
To order online, all you have to do is just go to frugalbookstore.net. It's very simple. You can also buy gift cards, and it's an easy process just checking out. Our hours of operation are Monday through Wednesday, 10 to 3 p.m., Thursday and Friday, 10 to 5 p.m., and Saturday, 10 to 3 p.m. The mission of Frugal Bookstore is to change minds one book at a time and to increase the literacy in our community. You missed it.
No.
You missed it. I'm a star.
That's a wonderful commercial. So welcome back. We're going to come back. Folks are going to be reassembling, adding their video again and their sound. And this is one of our favorite times in these because we open it up for questions, and we are already getting these wonderful questions in here. And so I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Monique to start us off as people continue to file back in.
Yes, there are lots of questions coming in, which speaks actually to what Nina said. This is just the tip, teeny tip. So we have to have more conversations. So one question that comes in is actually, what should the next mayor of Boston do to address gentrification in Roxbury? Any thoughts? One person want to answer that question? I know it's a hard choice.
I can answer. I couldn't find my unmute button. The next mayor of Boston should care and put their money where their mouth is.
Thank you.
Very clear to the point. Thank you.
The next mayor of Boston, and this is a question that I am asking my friends who are elected officials and asking folks who know other elected officials, is how do you balance receiving money from developers and not having it impact the community you're supposed to serve? Because this is what happened with the Harriet Tubman House. Because the developer gave money to all of the elected officials, and this is the first time in our history that we've had this many Black and brown elected officials, and they all stayed silent because they received money. Well, sorry, let me be clear, donations from the developer. And so how moving forward with the mayor, because it's under your leadership, how will you lead? Because that right there was a clear example. Any one of them could have said, hey, no, there's a better way, or let's get community input. And I've never seen a group of people with this much power during a time where most were Black and brown, that they all stayed silent. And so accountability.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would also add, in terms of how will they revamp the community engagement process from the RFP all the way down to the breaking of ground. So, Roxbury tends to have a completely different process than other neighborhoods when it comes to just understanding what the process is, understanding when the meetings are happening, understanding how to, give input, understanding when projects when buildings will be demolished. Even to what construction crews do, and don't do in different neighborhoods. And so I think that understanding what their process will be for creating equity and ensuring that residents' voices are respected and heard and valued, and there's consistency in their process.
Great, thank you. Another question from our Q&A section. What is one change in the regulations or laws governing the city's development approval process that you think would make a positive difference in slowing down or stopping the gentrification displacement process? So.
I think Rita raised an excellent one, to have a manifesto as to what the neighborhood will tolerate and won't, what the standards are. And I can say, as somebody who worked very hand in glove with the development process to set a 50-year-old nonprofit financially feasible after being in disarray for so long. And that was an arduous, everyday, for 6 years process, taking back taxes off that were nearly $100,000, getting us out of land court so that the building would not be sold, reinstating the 501c3, going to the IRS and making right with them, going through a 200-page audit with flying colors. They said we're the best nonprofit they've ever encountered, to removing the penalties and taxes that come from late payment of late filing of tax, $10,000 within 2 weeks. So after going through that and going to community meetings like nobody's business, I was gifted to be able to attend things like that. The average person cannot go to these meetings. Even with COVID, the average person cannot go to these meetings. It's ridiculous. So my statement about my neighborhood is that we're under siege. Not only are we under siege by the developers, but we're under siege by the opioid apocalypse that came down Mass Ave and spread all into the neighborhoods of the South End and Lower Roxbury. We're under siege by Northeastern University, grabbing up land worse than the developers. And we're under siege by, they were trying to take the mature trees. Oh, and then the so-called low-income housing that's supposed to be for the residents to learn how to own and manage and operate. It was being parceled out to the development, to the management companies that were started by former BRA employees. They left the BRA to go and manage these low-income projects. And now somehow, 30, 40 years later, now they own them. That's millions and millions and millions of dollars. And you raise the rent, you displace the residents, and now you've got prime real estate on the public dime. So when you look at that whole process, to have that kind of understanding, you have to be able to make some
Nina, you're losing your sound a little bit, Nina. But I wanted to, Nina, you're losing your sound, but I also saw Rita wanted to pass it a bit to Rita because I saw her wanting to say something.
Well, I think part of it is some of these regulations already exist. Article 50, Article 80, which requires developers to consult the community about building, is not taken seriously. They don't take it. I remember being at a community meeting where the guy just openly said, oh, this is a mere formality. It'll go through, I think he was going through ZBOA at that point. And that's the way many of the developers feel about the existing regulations. That, you know, we don't, on one level, we don't need new ones. We just need to adhere to the ones we've got.
I would agree with that entirely.
Yep.
I would say, I would add to that the BRA and the ZBA, they need to be beholden to the community.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Rodney.
So I wanted to, sorry, Monique, did you want to go?
Nope, go ahead, that's fine.
So I wanted to, we have just a few minutes, and I wanted our last question to be, you know, there are a variety of people who, and I know there are many questions, and I'm sorry to all those who question, we can't get to them all tonight, but maybe we'll find another forum for keeping this going. We're going to talk about it. But what I wanted to ask is, there's a variety of people who are listening in. There are people who are white who live in the suburbs. There are people who are white who live in Roxbury. There are people, are Black community residents who are watching. But that array of people of different location, different backgrounds, can you speak to what can people who are listening tonight do to support the work that you're doing to impact positive change in this? People from all different backgrounds. Can you speak to how can people do something that is useful and helpful?
And I will add to that, there's a very important question that relates to that, which is, there are people in our audience who have resources that reflect the wealth gap. And they're also wondering what public or private funds exist that they can invest in that would help reduce the cost of home ownership in communities of Roxbury. So
I would add to that. So the really important thing, if you look at since Marty Walsh took on being the mayor and now he's ready to leave us, if you look at contracting in the city, which accounts for roughly, I don't know, I want to say close to $750,000. So do you realize that only 1% of that money goes to Black and brown contractors? So immediately, the first mayor, 1% of that money, just 1%. $750,000.
We're talking millions and millions.
Oh well, yeah, right. The whole city budget's about $3.5 billion, but I'm talking the money the city spends to actually get stuff done in City Hall, whatever. It's last I checked, it was about $650 million. I think it's a little bit more now, but the issue is that only 1% of that money gets spent with Black and brown contractors and contractors who are businesses that are in the city of Boston. So that's the thing that helps to drive this wealth inequity. And so if there's any one thing that people can do is recognize that and just go after that and say this just won't do.
Yes, I would agree with Rodney, because one of the things, even with affordable housing, I think the lowest might be like 8,000 people on a wait list, and there's no money. And we're a Black developer, and there's not money out there for us to go out and build more housing or purchase more housing. There has to be some type of model that can be put together, and there are so many different models around the country. What's going to work best for Boston? Because you're looking at, even though BRA, they changed the name to BPDA, it hasn't really changed since the 1960s. As a matter of fact, it's gotten worse. I mean, I was fortunate that I purchased a home years ago, but when I look at my nephews and young people, they can't afford to live in Boston. And even with TDC, we have some what we call market rate, and we keep ours lower than the average market rate. And our 1 bedrooms are almost 2,000. Our 2 bedrooms are close to 3,000. Yeah, it's out of control. So there's got to be a model. But BPDA and BRA, all they did was change the name.
Yep.
Another thing I think that particularly people in suburbs can do is Boston is not the only place in the world to need affordable housing. Look at the zoning in your community and see what that's doing to keep out affordable housing in your community. And by keeping out affordable housing, also undermining the diversity of your community. I mean, there's a lot that comes with housing. There's a lot of people that come with housing. And part of the reason there's the pressure that there is on Boston for affordable housing is because you can't get none in Newton, or Lexington. And so we need to talk about, this kind of zoning that happens in affluent communities that puts all this pressure on Boston.
Thank you, Rita.
Yeah, equity is a huge problem, Rita. Thank you for mentioning that, because in Roxbury, half the units are affordable. Half the units. Mm-hmm. That's just crazy.
This is just such a rich and deep conversation, and I'm just so grateful. And I want to give Marisa, who is our keynote, the last word to sort of close out this portion of it. And again, so much here. We could talk for another couple hours, but we're going to wrap it up. And I just want to see what Marisa might want to say to after listening to everybody and being so immersed in this herself.
Well, I'll definitely keep it short and sweet. And it's really based off of what I'm hearing, what I've heard this evening, but also what we talked about when the panel met before this talk. And it's really about, we've been talking about awareness. And again, this is, we know that this is such a big topic, and we could probably be talking about gentrification and displacement forever, for months. And but the key thing is about raising awareness, one community, one village at a time. And we need to have more of these conversations and create more of these spaces, and also and educate people in terms of what's going on in our communities, and especially the Roxbury community. And then help to build that agency, which Tomiqua talked about. Like, people need to understand that they have power, and that they can act, and they can use that power and access that power. And so, and that we have to do it now. The time has passed, and it's time, and the time is now. And so we really need to step into our power. And then how do we create access? One is, you're doing that now by creating this space for that conversation. But where are these other spaces? Nina mentioned the Roxbury Strategic Master Plan Committee, and there's so many other spaces that we can begin to ensure that there is proper access for people to be engaged around these conversations, engaged around these decisions. And then how can we advocate? Not only those that are doing the work, that are advocating for themselves and their community, but those who are living outside of our community in other towns and other cities, advocating collectively around this issue, and helping to share different models and different strategies for how to address gentrification and displacement. And then that accountability piece, I think, is really key. Right? We all play a role, but those who are offending the most, really needs to take accountability for their actions. And the reasons why in Arnesse and her great work, there is a lack of accountability. And we really need to address that. And that has to, that really has to, we can't really move forward if we're not really acknowledging what is happening and why it's happening. And those of us who are being most impacted are thinking or understanding that this is systematic, and it's very strategic, and it's very purposeful. And so therefore we need to address that in order for us to move forward. So there needs to be more accountability. And then lastly is just really around the collective action. So as I said, I was very honored to be a part of this conversation, and it is very important to me. However, there are many others in the community that are doing work around this, that are living and reading this issue every single day. And that's why it was important for me to really tap into my community, to bring them up, make sure that they are part of this conversation as well. And I think that we can continue to build from there. I know that there is those on the panel that are already working collaboratively together, but whom else do we need to be collaborating and connecting with, so that we can all you really address this issue holistically, is what I would say.
Thank you so much. And, thank you, everyone. And I know that there may be people who are watching tonight who want to figure out how to plug in, how to help, how to support. I'm going to put an email address, engagement@uuum.org, in the chat. And so if you would like, we're going to put together a short page of resources about how folks can support, be involved in a variety of efforts. And if you want to send an email to engagement@uum.org and request information about how to make an impact on gentrification and displacement issues in Roxbury, just send an email to that, and we'll pull some resources together, pull some recommendations from the people on our panel together to send out in the next week or so. And we'll be in conversation about whether we can, what kind of conversation we might have again after this, because again, it's critical. I don't know how many issues facing Roxbury are more critical than this one right now. So maybe, thinking about how to have another discussion. I am so grateful to you all for being here. I feel really honored that you would be part of this discussion. So many, many thanks to you.
Thank you. And I would
Thank
also
you.
invite, if you want to put in your contact information in the chat, just as we close, you're welcome to do so. Thank you, Arnesse. I see that you did put some information in. Thank you. Many thank you to everyone who participated tonight. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
and I see
you.
comments on thanking you for doing such a great
Yes.
job educating us, and I feel that way too. Thank you for educating me.
Mhm.
Yeah. Lots of a great panel, great panels. Yeah, you guys, you're awesome. Yeah, I feel really honored. Thank you on behalf of the Urban
Thank you.
Ministry.
Thank you for giving us a space,
Yeah.
to discuss, or at least start it, because as Nina
Yes.
said, it is the tip. But Boston is small, so we're all in Massachusetts is small. We all have to work together.
Yes.
We'll become like a New York. Have a great evening.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Good
All right.
night. Good night.
Good
Be
night.
well,
Bye.
everybody. Nice